39,000 feet above the American heartland. A man in a gray hoodie sits alone in seat 1A of a first-class cabin. Around him, crystal glasses catch the light, silver trays, white linen, the quiet luxury of people being treated exactly as they expected. Except him. He has 2 plastic cups on his tray table, the kind they use in economy. He hasn't moved them, hasn't complained, hasn't said a word to anyone. He's just watching and writing. The flight attendant moves through the cabin like she owns it. 26 years of practiced grace. She knows every passenger by name, every preference, every expectation, every passenger except one. What she doesn't know, what none of them know, is that the man in the hoodie stopped taking notes 10 minutes ago, because he'd already seen enough. And somewhere in his canvas bag, there's a document with a seal on it that's about to change everything about this flight. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Desmond Holt didn't hit snooze. He never hit snooze. He sat up in the dark, feet on the cold floor, and stayed there for exactly 30 seconds. Not because he was tired, because he always gave himself 30 seconds before the day started. His father had taught him that. Take 30 seconds. Then move. He moved. The hotel room was clean and anonymous. 12 floors above downtown Los Angeles, with a view of city lights that most people would have stopped to appreciate. Desmond didn't stop. He'd seen the view the night before. He had work to do. The jeans were worn at the left knee. The hoodie was gray, the kind of gray that used to be darker before too many wash cycles. The sneakers were white once, clean still, but the soles carried the particular compression of shoes that had logged serious miles. He dressed in 4 minutes, didn't check the mirror twice. The laptop went into the canvas bag last. A Dell, 6 years old, with a hinge that caught slightly when you opened it past 90 degrees. 3 different people on his executive team had tried to replace it. He'd said no 3 times. He'd coded the first algorithm that made him his first $1 million on this machine, in a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, at 2 in the morning, eating cold rice from a container. He wasn't sentimental about many things. He was sentimental about this. The Apex Airlines app showed Flight 2209 departing LAX at 6:15 a.m., arriving JFK at 2:58 p.m., 5 hours and 43 minutes across 4 time zones. Long enough to see everything he needed to see. The ticket had been booked under his own name. Full fare. First class. Same as any other passenger. No corporate account. No priority flags in the system. No note in the reservation linking Desmond Holt the passenger to Desmond Holt, the man who had signed the purchase agreement for Apex Airlines 72 hours ago. That was the point. He'd bought 4 companies this way. Always flown in anonymous. Always eaten at the restaurants called the customer service lines, stood in the actual lines. Every single time he'd found things that the consultants missed. Things that didn't show up in the reports. Things that only revealed themselves when nobody knew who was watching. He took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, didn't stop for coffee at the hotel restaurant, because the hotel restaurant was $48 for eggs, and he'd made a rule a long time ago about $48 eggs. He bought a black coffee from the cart outside, $3, drank it walking to the rideshare pickup. The driver didn't recognize him. Good. LAX at 5:20 a.m. was its own kind of theater. The overhead lights were too bright for the hour. Everyone moved with the slightly vacant expression of people who had been awake longer than they wanted to be. Desmond moved through security without incident. Shoes off, laptop out, canvas bag into the bin. The agent barely glanced at him. He found the Apex Airlines first-class lounge and stood outside it for a moment, not hesitating, observing. The entrance was staffed by a single agent, a young man with an Apex logo pin on his lapel, who checked credentials with the practice speed of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. 2 passengers ahead of Desmond walked in without slowing down. The agent smiled, said something brief, waved them through. Desmond presented his boarding pass. The agent looked at the pass, looked at Desmond, the hoodie, the canvas bag, looked at the pass again.
First class?
Brief, maybe 2 seconds, then the agent stepped aside. Of course, welcome. Desmond went in, got water, sat in a corner chair, opened the laptop, typed 2 words in the assessment document he'd started the night before. Day 1. Then he opened another file, just a photograph. His father, James Holt, standing in front of the gate of the Midwest Steel facility in Detroit, 1987. Work boots. Both hands in the pockets of his coat. looking directly at the camera with the steady, unimpressed expression of a man who had been up since before dawn and would not be home until after dark and had made peace with that a long time ago. James Holt had worked that plant for 31 years, never missed a shift, never complained in public, came home, ate dinner, helped Desmond with math homework at the kitchen table, and went to bed. Did it again the next day, and the next. Desmond looked at the photograph for 3 seconds, closed the file, picked up his bag and walked to the gate. The boarding process for Apex Flight 2209 was efficient enough. Gate agents called zones with the slightly automated cadence of people reciting a script they'd memorized years ago. First class boarded first. Desmond walked down the jetway, turned left into the cabin, and found seat 1A. The aircraft was a wide body with 12 seats in first class, arranged in a 2x2 configuration, with enough space between rows that passengers could breathe without consulting each other. The leather was a deep navy, the kind that photographed well in airline advertisements. Small reading lamps cast warm circles of light over each seat. It was, objectively speaking, a comfortable space. Desmond settled in, stowed the canvas bag in the overhead, opened the laptop, hinge catching slightly at 90 degrees as always, pulled up the assessment document, started a new section, cabin observations first class. He had 40 minutes before departure. He used them. The other 11 passengers filtered in over the next 25 minutes, and Desmond didn't look up from the screen, but he didn't need to. He had a view of the entire cabin from 1A. He tracked arrivals in his peripheral vision the way he'd learned to track room dynamics in boardrooms. You didn't watch people directly. You watched how a room organized itself around them. Seat 2D filled with a man in a navy suit, early 60s, the kind of physical confidence that came from decades of being the most important person in most rooms. He had a leather briefcase with brass clasps and a gold watch that caught the cabin light every time he moved his wrist. He settled in like someone claiming territory. Seat 2F, a woman with a laptop and a reporter's stillness, 30s, watching things. Desmond noticed the way she positioned her phone in the gap between the seat and the window before she opened her laptop. Interesting. Seat 3A, a woman in her early 60s, compact and precise, with the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of professional authority. She pulled a file folder from her bag and opened it before the seatbelt sign had even illuminated. The rest of first class filled in around them. A retired-looking couple. A man in his 50s with headphones already on. A woman reading something on a tablet. 12 passengers. 11 of them were going to have a different morning than they expected. The lead flight attendant appeared from the forward galley at 6:08 a.m., 7 minutes before departure. She moved through the cabin with the smooth, practiced efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing thousands of times. Her Apex Airlines uniform was impeccable. Her name tag read Carol. She had brown hair pulled back, and the kind of smile that was professionally warm, without being personally warm. There was a difference. Desmond had learned to see it. Carol began the pre-departure service. She started at the back of first class and worked forward. Champagne, orange juice, still water, a warm and specific greeting for each passenger. Desmond heard fragments of it as she moved up the aisle. "Good morning, Dr. Okafor. Lovely to have you with us today. Mr. Pullman, your usual window seat. I see champagne?" Of course, right away. By the time she reached row 2, she had addressed 5 passengers by name and offered champagne to all of them. Desmond watched without turning his head. The woman at 2F, he'd clocked her watching too. The slight adjustment of her phone position when Carol stopped at Greg Pullman's seat. Subtle, professional, the kind of move that came from practice. Carol reached the front of the cabin. She turned. She walked past seat 1A without pausing. Not quickly. Not with obvious intent. She simply did not stop, did not look at the seat, did not acknowledge the person in it. Continued into the galley. Desmond reached the assessment document, added a line. 6:11 a.m. Pre-departure champagne service. Seat 1A omitted. All other first-class seats served. He underlined the word omitted, not missed, not skipped by accident. He'd watched Carol move through the cabin. There was no accident in it. She was a 26-year professional with a pre-departure service routine she could probably execute in her sleep. You didn't forget 1A after serving 2D, 2F, 3C, 4B, and 4D. You chose not to stop. There was a junior attendant in the galley, a young woman, late 20s, with a nervous energy that manifested as slightly too quick movements. She came out twice during the pre-departure window to adjust the galley curtain and check the storage compartment, and both times her eyes traveled to 1A and then immediately away. She knew. She'd seen it, and she'd gone back into the galley. Desmond had seen that too. He closed the laptop as the aircraft door was sealed and the engines began their low, building hum. He leaned back in the seat that had cost him $4,000 and that he had received $0 worth of pre-departure service in. And he watched the Los Angeles skyline begin to move past the window. He thought about his father. James Holt had worked 31 years at that plant and had never once complained about the things that happened to him there. The assumptions people made, the way certain doors stayed closed regardless of how long you'd been there or how well you worked. He had come home and helped Desmond with math homework and said nothing about it because he was protecting his son from something he wasn't sure his son could carry yet. Desmond had figured it out eventually anyway. He always did. The plane lifted off at 6:19 a.m., 4 minutes behind schedule. Desmond noted it, not because it mattered practically, but because operational punctuality was a data point. Everything was a data point. 30 minutes into the flight, somewhere over the desert east of the city, Carol emerged from the galley with the champagne service. Crystal flutes on a silver tray. She moved through the cabin with the same smooth efficiency. Started at the back. "Dr. Okafor, would you care for champagne?" "Mr. Pullman, another glass." "Of course." She reached row 1, walked past 1A into the galley. Desmond gave it 60 seconds. Then he pressed the call button. It took 4 minutes, which was also a data point. Carol appeared. Her smile arrived before she did. "Can I help you?" "I'd like some champagne, please." A half-second pause. The kind that wouldn't register to most people. It registered to Desmond. "Of course. Let me check on our inventory." She went back to the galley. Desmond looked across the aisle. The woman at 2F, Dana, he'd caught the name from Carol's earlier greeting. Dana Reeves was not looking at him. Her eyes were on her laptop screen, but her right hand was resting on the armrest, fingers very still. And through the gap between her seat and the window, the phone's camera lens was oriented toward the aisle. He didn't acknowledge it. Carol returned 4 minutes later with a plastic cup, not a crystal flute. A plastic cup, the clear kind used in economy, with perhaps 2 inches of champagne in it. She placed it on his armrest with the same careful precision she'd used when setting down crystal for everyone else. "Here you are, sir." Desmond looked at the cup, looked at the crystal glass in Greg Pullman's hand across the aisle, looked at the cup again. "Is there a reason this is different from what the other passengers receive?" "We manage our crystal inventory carefully, sir. Economy has different service requirements and we sometimes need to conserve. I'm in first class. Of course, I understand your concern." She was already turning. Desmond added 3 lines to the assessment document. 7:22 a.m. Champagne served in economy plastic cup. All other first-class passengers received crystal. No inventory explanation offered. No apology offered. Pattern confirmed. In the galley, Brianna Wells was counting meal containers for the 3rd time. Because she needed something to do with her hands. She'd seen the plastic cup thing. She'd watched Carol take it off the economy cart, not the first-class service kit, and carry it out to 1A with the same expression she wore when she was being extremely professional about something she didn't intend to be questioned about. Brianna had been with Apex for 2 years. Carol had been her assigned mentor from the first week. She'd learned the job from Carol, the service sequences, the emergency protocols, the 100 small details that made the difference between good cabin management and exceptional cabin management. Carol was genuinely gifted at the work. That was the hardest part. She was excellent at most of it. Brianna picked up the meal manifest, checked the warming compartment. 12 first-class passengers, 12 meal assignments. The premium entree for Flight 2209 was filet mignon, prepared to 4 temperature specifications per passenger preference noted at booking. She counted the containers, counted again, 12. All 12 were there. She checked the assignment sheet clipped to the compartment door. Each container was labeled by seat number. She ran her finger down the list. 2D medium rare, 2F medium, 3A medium well, 3C medium rare, and so on all the way down. She got to the bottom of the list. There was no 1A. She read the list again, slowly this time in case she'd skimmed wrong. 2D, 2F, 3A, 3C, 4B, 4, 5A, 5C, 5D. 11 seats. 11 filet mignons, 1 seat missing. Not missing because the passenger in 1A hadn't ordered it. She'd seen the booking notes. He'd selected the premium entree at the time of booking, same as everyone else. Missing because someone had removed it from the assignment list before the meal service started. Brianna stood in the galley for a long moment. Thought about her mother's medical bills, which were real and ongoing and required her income to stay consistent. Thought about the performance review Carol submitted each quarter, which was the document that determined whether that income stayed consistent. Thought about the man sitting in 1A, who had pressed the call button and waited 4 minutes and received a plastic cup. She put the manifest back, walked out of the galley. Did not say anything. At 7:51 a.m., Dana Reeves opened a new document on her laptop and typed a single line, Apex Airlines 2,209 first-class service discrepancies, seat 1A. She had been a journalist for 9 years. She'd covered fraud, covered discrimination cases in housing and healthcare, covered 3 major corporate lawsuits involving civil rights violations. She knew how a pattern looked when it was assembling itself in real time in front of her. She also knew that what she had so far was observation, not evidence. She needed to see the meal service. Across the cabin, Greg Pullman was on his second glass of champagne and his third work call, speaking loudly enough that the retired couple in row 4 could probably follow along. He was describing a land acquisition deal in terms that strongly implied the other party hadn't known what they were agreeing to. He laughed twice. The gold watch caught the cabin light both times. Greg was not a bad man. He was a man who had been operating in environments that rewarded not noticing things for so long that not noticing had become structural, automatic. He had not thought twice about the plastic cup because it had not affected him personally. That was a kind of not noticing that had its own name. But Greg didn't use that name for it because you rarely had a word for your own most comfortable blind spots. Dr. Renee Okafor in 3A had noticed. She had 41 years of practice reading small signals in environments, where the small signals sometimes meant everything. She'd spent the first 12 years of her career being the only black woman in operating rooms that were not designed for her presence, and she had developed, out of necessity, a very precise instrument for detecting when a space was being managed around someone rather than for them. She had watched Carol place the plastic cup on 1A's armrest. She had watched the man in 1A quiet, unhurried, with the specific stillness of someone who has made a decision not to react, accept it without comment. She had returned to her file folder, but she had also watched from her peripheral vision for the next 20 minutes. At 8:04 a.m., Carol began the meal service. She started at the back of the cabin. This was standard service moved from rear to front so that passengers had equivalent wait times regardless of row. Desmond was familiar with the logic. He was also aware that in a 12-seat cabin, when you reached row 1, you were the last stop. He watched the service unfold. Carol at 5D. This evening's premium entree is our filet mignon, hand-cut and prepared with garlic herb butter. I have medium rare noted for you. Does that still suit? A performance, genuine warmth, the kind you couldn't entirely fake after 26 years. Carol liked she was good at it, and she applied it with precision to specific people. Row 5, row 4, row 3. Dr. Okafor received her medium well with a brief and pleasant exchange about the Chicago Medical Conference she was en route to. Row 2. Greg Pullman spent 3 minutes discussing temperature preference and received a detailed description of the preparation method that Desmond could hear clearly from 1A. Carol moved forward, reached row 1, stopped at 1A. Sir, the professional smile, present and precise. I'm so sorry, we've had unexpectedly high demand for the filet mignon this morning and we've run out. I can offer you grilled chicken, which is also excellent herb roasted, served with the same accompaniments. Desmond didn't respond immediately. He looked at Carol. Then he looked past her at Greg Pullman, who was cutting into a filet mignon 2 feet away. Then he looked back at Carol. How many passengers ordered the steak before me? Carol's professional smile held. I'm not able to discuss other passengers' orders, sir, but I can tell you the chicken is genuinely very good and our chef. I'm the last seat in the service sequence. You worked back to front. I watched. He said it without heat, just information. So before you reached me, you'd taken 11 orders, and now there's no steak. Sometimes passengers change their selections during service, sir. It does happen. Did anyone change their selection today? A pause, 1 second, 2. I'll get you set up with the chicken right away. She turned. Desmond watched her go. He typed 8:09 a.m. Meal service. Informed filet mignon unavailable. Seat 1A only. All 11 other passengers received filet mignon. No inventory shortage visible in galley during service. Explanation offered. Demand. Explanation is not logistically consistent with back-to-front service sequence. Then he added, this is the third service omission. Champagne, crystal glassware, premium entree. Pattern is sequential and deliberate. He closed the laptop, and for the first time in 2 hours he was not taking notes. He was simply sitting with it. Because here was the thing about it. Here was the thing that the assessment document didn't capture and couldn't capture. Because it was not a data point. It was a weight. The specific weight of sitting in a seat you had paid full price for and being systematically reduced, service by service, as though the goal was to make you understand that you did not belong there. As though, if they couldn't remove you from the seat, they could remove the seat from around you. Desmond had sat in that weight before, in a hotel in Chicago at 31, when a security guard had followed him through the lobby for 8 minutes and then asked to see his room key 3 times. The weight had been there, in a conference room in San Francisco at 27, when he was the only person in the room who hadn't been offered a chair, and it had taken 4 minutes for anyone to notice, and he'd been the one who'd finally said quietly, I'll need a chair. The weight had been there. It didn't get lighter with money. It didn't get lighter with the Forbes profiles or the presidential advisory calls or the Harvard case studies. It just got different. Now he carried it into rooms where he was the owner, and it still arrived before his credentials did. His father had carried it for 31 years in front of that steel plant. Hadn't said a word about it. Desmond said something about it, just not out loud and not yet. He said it in acquisition agreements and transformation programs, and the kind of institutional changes that outlasted the individuals who initiated them. He looked out the window. Somewhere over the flat middle of the country, the land spread out below in the enormous indifferent geometry of American farmland. Impossibly large, impossibly quiet from up here. He had bought this airline, every seat in this cabin, every plastic cup in the galley, every performance review Carol Marsh submitted that determined whether Brianna Wells kept her job. They didn't know that yet. He hadn't decided exactly when to tell them. He was still watching. In the galley, something was happening. Brianna was preparing the chicken entree for 1A. She moved through the steps mechanically, hands working while her brain ran a separate, louder process in the background. She had been doing this for 2 hours now, running the background process and suppressing it. Carol was in the forward galley, speaking quietly on the internal phone, and Brianna had the main galley to herself for the first time since boarding. She opened the warming compartment, looked at the meal containers again. There were still 4 filet mignon containers sitting untouched in the compartment, each one labeled with the seat number it had been assigned to. 3 of those numbers were empty seats passengers who'd changed their selection. One of them, she now understood, had been removed from the assignment sheet before service even began. She counted to 5. Then she opened the shared tablet, the crew device that held service manifests, passenger information, and Carol's accumulated operational notes, and she navigated to the folder she used every flight for reference. The file was labeled Cabin Standards Passenger Experience Notes. She'd opened it before. She'd thought it was procedural documentation. She'd used it during training when she needed guidance on service sequencing. She opened it now and read it differently. The first section looked normal. Standard language about service sequencing, temperature protocols, allergy management. She'd read all of this before, but she scrolled further, past where she'd stopped before, into a section she hadn't seen. The subsection was titled, in Carol's handwriting captured in a scanned note, Passenger Profile Management. It was a guide, not for providing good service, for calibrating service down. Specific language for identifying passengers. Carol's notes described as comfort level mismatches with the premium cabin environment. Specific strategies for reducing service without creating a documented complaint trail. Always offer an alternative. Always frame omissions as inventory issues. Always ensure the conversation stays verbal with no written record. A section on handling pushback that included the phrase, if a passenger challenges a service decision, refer to standard inventory management language and do not elaborate. There was a section on reporting. How to record incidents so that complaint escalations would be dismissed at the supervisory level. Carol had noted, in parentheses, the name of the current cabin supervisor who she described as aligned with these standards. 2 pages of it, handwritten originally, scanned into the document, and stored in the shared crew tablet that Brianna had been accessing for 2 years. She had read it. She had just not read all of it. Her hands were very still on the tablet. She thought about her mother's medical bills. She thought about her performance review. She thought about the man in 1A, sitting in the front of the aircraft with his canvas bag and his worn sneakers, waiting for a chicken entree he hadn't ordered. She thought about the word alignment. Then she took her personal phone out of her pocket and photographed every page. At 8:31 a.m., Desmond's phone showed a call connecting. He answered it quietly, one hand cupped loosely over his mouth so the audio stayed contained. He was not hiding. He was being considerate. There was a difference, Ray. His voice was level. Pull everything you have on Apex Airlines complaint history. 5 years. I need it sorted by route and broken out by passenger demographics wherever you can get the data. A pause while Ray responded. Yes, specifically. Look for complaint patterns on transcon routes. Cross-reference with crew assignments where the data allows. He listened for a moment. And Ray, check who the named lead attendant is on the most complained routes. I want to see if there's a name that shows up more than once. He ended the call. He didn't look up from his laptop. But Dana Reeves, sitting at 2F with one hand resting motionless on her armrest, had heard every word. She reached for her phone. Searched Apex Airlines discrimination complaints. Then, Apex Airlines first-class service complaints demographics. Then, after a moment, Carol Marsh Apex Airlines. The search returned a complaint forum thread from 14 months ago. A passenger describing a first-class experience on a cross-country Apex flight, where they had been denied the premium entree, received economy-grade servingware, and had their boarding credentials questioned despite presenting a valid ticket. The thread had 340 replies. Most of them were variations on "this happened to me too." Dana opened a new document, began to write. Outside the window of seat 1A, somewhere over the invisible boundary between the central states and the east, the sky was doing the particular thing it did at altitude on clear days, where the blue got so concentrated and so clean it didn't look real. Desmond noticed it, didn't write it down. Some things you just look at. He thought about his father again. Not the photograph this time, the actual memory. A Tuesday evening, kitchen table, homework spread across the surface, the television on low in the other room. He'd been 13, and he'd been upset about something that had happened at school. A teacher who'd assumed he'd copied a test because she couldn't reconcile his score with her expectation of him. He'd been explaining it to his father with 13-year-old fury, and his father had listened to all of it without interrupting. Then James Holt had said, "The way you respond to that is going to matter more than what she did. Not because it's fair, because it's yours." Desmond had not fully understood it at 13. He understood it now. He had been responding for 29 years. The chicken entree arrived at 8:44 a.m. Brianna placed it on the tray table. She looked like she wanted to say something. She didn't say anything. She started to turn. Desmond spoke quietly. "Thank you." She stopped. "Are you all right?" Brianna looked at him. Something moved across her face, something that was not quite an answer. "Yes, sir," she said. "Enjoy your meal." She walked back to the galley. Desmond looked at the chicken, looked at the assessment document, typed one line, "The problem isn't the menu," left the rest of the sentence for later. The aircraft crossed into Pennsylvania airspace at 10:17 a.m., 1 hour and 41 minutes from JFK. The cabin had settled into the mid-flight quiet, the specific hush of people who had eaten and were now reading or sleeping or staring at screens with the faraway expression of people mentally rehearsing whatever came next on their schedules. Desmond had finished the chicken. He'd finished his notes. He had opened a second document, this one a draft communication to his general counsel and the Apex Airlines HR director, and he had written 2 paragraphs of it and then stopped. Not because he didn't know what to write, because he wasn't finished watching yet. Something was going to happen. He could feel the particular atmospheric pressure of a situation that had not reached its apex. Carol had not reappeared from the forward galley in 23 minutes. Brianna had made 2 circuits of the cabin with the beverage cart, both times with a quality of deliberate ordinariness that Desmond recognized as someone keeping their hands busy to quiet their brain. And Dana Reeves at 2F had stopped typing 40 minutes ago and had not resumed. She was waiting. Desmond was waiting. The plane flew on through blue air above a country that was enormous and complicated, and from this altitude, looked like it had all been arranged by someone who intended it to make sense. He opened the photograph of his father. 3 seconds, closed it, and waited. The plastic cup was still sitting on his tray table. Desmond hadn't moved it, hadn't thrown it away, hadn't asked for a replacement. It sat there, 2 inches of champagne long gone flat, a clear plastic cylinder that cost the airline approximately 4 cents, and had been placed in front of him with the careful deliberation of a message. He was leaving it there on purpose. Because sometimes evidence needed to stay visible. The cabin had quieted into that particular mid-flight lull, where the meal trays had been cleared and the blankets had come out, and people were either sleeping or staring at screens with the unfocused concentration of the comfortably full. Greg Pullman across the aisle had reclined his seat and closed his eyes, one hand resting on his stomach, gold watch catching the reading lamp every time the aircraft shifted. Comfortable, untroubled. That was one way to be on this flight. Dr. Renee Okafor in 3A was not sleeping. She was reading, or she appeared to be reading, but the page hadn't turned in 11 minutes. She had the particular stillness of someone who was actually listening. Desmond had noticed it before. Some people went quiet to rest, some people went quiet to pay attention. The distinction was visible if you knew what you were looking for. Dana Reeves at 2F was typing again, not the measured, deliberate typing of someone drafting something careful. The faster kind, the kind that came out when a story was organizing itself and you needed to get the shape of it down before it shifted. Desmond knew that kind of urgency. Different industry, same feeling. He typed one more line in his assessment document and then closed the laptop. Let himself be still for a minute. He had not been angry on this flight. That was the thing most people would have found hard to understand. They expected anger. When he eventually told this story, and he would tell it, because that was part of what he did with these things, people would how he stayed calm. They would say it with admiration that carried inside it a faint note of disbelief. As though staying calm was the extraordinary part. As though the discrimination was simply weather. But the calm was not the extraordinary part. The calm was the result of 29 years of practice, of learning very precisely the difference between reacting and responding. His father had taught him the distinction at a kitchen table in Detroit when he was 13 years old, and he had spent nearly 3 decades refining what it meant in practice. Reacting gave other people the narrative, responding let you keep it. So Desmond sat and watched and took notes and waited for what was coming next. He didn't have to wait long. It started at 10:41 a.m. Carol emerged from the forward galley with the beverage cart. Second service, coffee, tea, juice, water, standard mid-flight. She moved through the cabin with the same practiced efficiency, the same warmth calibrated precisely to each passenger. Dr. Okafor, more coffee, Renee. Apparently they were on a first-name basis. 26 years on the same routes built that kind of familiarity. Greg Pullman, now awake again and apparently refreshed. I'll take a coffee, Diana. 2 sugars. Her name was Carol. But Greg Pullman had called her Diana and she had not corrected him. She had just smiled and said of course and reached for the coffee. That was its own kind of information. She reached row 1, stopped at 1A. Desmond looked up. Coffee, he said. A reasonable thing to ask for. A normal beverage request at 10:41 in the morning. Of course, sir. She reached for the carafe. Cream or sugar? Black, she poured into a plastic cup again. She set it on his tray table with the same professional precision, next to the first plastic cup, which was still sitting there, unasked for, not removed, because Desmond had left it there deliberately, and Carol had not offered to take it away. Now there were 2. Desmond looked at them, then at the crystal mugs she'd placed in front of Greg Pullman and the passengers in rows 3 through 5. He didn't say anything. Carol moved on, and somewhere behind him, Dana Reeves stopped typing. In the galley, Brianna was reorganizing things that did not need to be reorganized. She had moved the napkin stack twice, recounted the water bottles, checked the warming compartment, which she did not need to check, because she had checked it 20 minutes ago and nothing in it had changed. She was doing the things she did when her brain needed her hands to be busy, so it could work on the actual problem without being interrupted by the requirement to appear functional. The actual problem was the tablet. It was sitting on the galley counter, screen dark, 7 photographs on her personal phone of documents that were stored on that tablet. 7 photographs of a written guide for providing deliberately inferior service to passengers based on how they looked. 7 photographs that, if she showed them to the right person, would almost certainly end Carol Marsh's career, and might end her own, or might not. That was the part she kept circling back to, the might not. Because the thing about Brianna Wells at 27 years old, 2 years into a job that paid her rent and her mother's co-pays, and the monthly installment on the nursing aide, who came 4 mornings a week, was that she had learned very quickly that the distance between might not, and definitely not, was exactly the width of who was on your side when the decision got made. Carol had 26 years. Carol had the supervisor alignment she'd documented in her own notes. Carol had the institutional gravity of someone who had been doing something long enough that questioning it started to feel like questioning gravity. Brianna had 2 years, and 7 photographs, and a man sitting in 1A with 2 plastic cups on his tray table. She picked up the tablet, opened the passenger experience notes file, read the section she'd photographed again. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She scrolled to the bottom of the document, past Carol's notes, past the service calibration language, past the section on managing complaint escalations. There was a log, dates and flight numbers, going back 4 years. Each entry was a brief notation, a code that Brianna didn't immediately recognize. She looked at the codes, looked at the dates, looked at the flight numbers. Then she looked up the flight numbers in the crew scheduling system on the same tablet. Every flight in Carol's log was a transcon route. LAX to JFK, LAX to Boston, LAX to Atlanta. The entries followed a pattern she could see once she knew to look for it. Irregular intervals, roughly once or twice a month. A code followed by a seat number. She looked at today's flight in the system, then at the log. There was already an entry for today's date. This flight, this route. The code read PRM1, the seat number read 1A. She didn't know what PRM1 stood for. She could make a reasonable inference. Brianna stood in the galley for 30 seconds, doing the calculation, running the numbers the way she'd been doing for 2 hours. Then she took her phone back out and photographed the log page. She had 8 photographs now. She thought, okay. And then she thought, now what? What happened next was not something Brianna planned. It was something the situation planned, and she happened to be standing in it. At 10:58 a.m., Carol came back into the galley. She moved to the opposite counter, opened the crew communication panel, and picked up the internal handset, the one that connected to the cockpit. Brianna was 3 feet away, facing the storage compartment, hands inside it, appearing to inventory something. Roy. Carol's voice dropped, but not enough. I need to flag something on 1A. A pause. Passenger has been uncooperative with service adjustments throughout the flight. I'm seeing behavioral signs that concern me. Another pause, elevated affect, erratic communication. He made a call earlier that I'd describe as agitated, spoke about legal action. I think we should consider having ground security meet the flight. Brianna's hand found a bottle of water and gripped it. She did not turn around. She did not make a sound. Carol continued, I understand, but I want it on the record that I raised the concern. If anything escalates before we land, I need that documented on my end. A brief pause. Thank you, Roy. She set the handset down, walked out of the galley. Brianna stood at the storage compartment, water bottle in hand, not moving, because what she had just heard was not a safety report. She knew what safety reports sounded like. She'd heard 3 of them in 2 years, 2 genuine medical situations, and 1 actual behavioral incident involving a passenger who had needed to be redirected twice before calming down. Safety reports were specific. They referenced observable behaviors with timestamps. They used precise language because imprecise language in a safety report was itself a problem. What Carol had just delivered was not specific. It was not precise. It was a story. A story about a man who had received inferior service throughout a 5-hour, 43-minute flight, asked for the meal he'd ordered, and made a phone call that Carol had been close enough to overhear. A story that would result in law enforcement meeting the aircraft. Brianna thought about the 7-8 photographs on her phone. She thought about PRM1, Seat 1A. She thought about her mother's aide who came Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and what happened to Monday. Wednesday, Friday if she lost this job. Then she thought about the man in 1A, who was going to be met by law enforcement at JFK because he had asked why he wasn't served the same champagne as everyone else. She set the water bottle on the counter and walked out of the galley into the first-class cabin. Dr. Renee Okafor had not been reading for the past 22 minutes. She had been watching. 41 years of medical practice had given her two things above everything else: an ability to observe the room she was in, without appearing to observe it, and an absolute intolerance for watching preventable harm unfold, while people who could intervene stood aside for institutional reasons. She had seen the plastic cups. She had watched the meal service. She had heard fragments of Carol's conversation with the man in 1A at 9 a.m. and the specific vacancy in Carol's voice when she'd offered the chicken. The vacancy of someone executing a decision already made, not managing an actual inventory situation. She had been waiting to see what happened next. What happened next was Carol walking out of the galley with the expression of someone who had just done something definitive. Renee marked the expression, filed it. Then Carol stopped at 1A. Renee turned the page in her book, did not look up, but she slowed her breathing down the way she did in the OR when she needed her hands absolutely still and her attention absolutely total. Sir. Carol's voice had shifted, still professional, but carrying something underneath it now. Something that had moved past service into something with more teeth. I need to ask you to present your boarding documentation. We're conducting a standard mid-flight verification for select passengers. I showed my boarding pass at the gate. Yes, and we appreciate your cooperation. This is a separate protocol. What protocol? A pause. Crew discretion protocol. For passenger verification during flight. Silence from 1A for a moment. Then, is this a protocol you applied to any other passenger on this flight? Carol did not answer that. Renee set her book down. The movement was deliberate and quiet, but it was a movement, and in the particular silence that had descended on the first-class cabin, it carried. She turned in her seat, looked directly at Carol, used the voice she used when she needed a room's full attention without raising it. I've been flying first class for 20 years, Renee said. I have never been asked to present boarding documentation mid-flight, not once. She paused. Is this something you're asking all first-class passengers, or is this specific to this seat? Carol turned. Her professional composure was still intact, but it was working harder now. Dr. Okafor. It concerns me considerably. Renee's voice was level, even, the voice of someone who had delivered bad news to families in waiting rooms for 4 decades, and had learned that the steadier you were, the more space there was for other people to hear what you were actually saying. This man has received economy serviceware in a first-class seat, been told the premium entree was unavailable when it visibly was not, and is now being asked for documentation no one else has been asked for. I'm a physician. I'm trained to observe patterns. This is a pattern. The cabin was very quiet. Greg Pullman, who had been checking his phone, set it face down on his tray table. Carol straightened slightly. I understand your concern, but crew decisions during flight are subject to review, Renee said. I know. I'm noting this conversation for that review. She picked up her own phone and opened the notes application. And in that moment the galley curtain moved and Brianna Wells walked into the cabin. She stopped in the aisle, 3 feet from Carol, holding nothing, just standing there with her hands at her sides, and the expression of someone who had made a decision and was now on the other side of it, and could feel the particular clarity that sometimes came after the hardest choice. There are 4 filet mignon containers in the warming compartment, Brianna said. Carol turned, labeled and sealed. They've been there since before service started. Brianna's voice was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was just factual, in the way that facts, sometimes, are when you stop organizing them around someone else's comfort. There was never a shortage. The silence that followed was the kind that had physical weight. Greg Pullman was no longer looking at his phone. Dana Reeves had stopped typing. Carol's professional composure did something then that Desmond had been watching for. Not collapse, not break. It just shifted. The way a structure shifts when you remove the thing it had been built around. Still standing, but visibly rearranged. Brianna. Carol's voice had a different quality now. Quiet. Warning. The voice of a mentor who was also, in that moment, a person with considerably more institutional power, who was watching that power be challenged in public. We'll discuss this in the galley. I know. Brianna nodded. We will, but I wanted to say it here first. She looked at Desmond, then back at Carol. Because that's where it happened. Dana Reeves was recording. Had been recording for the past 4 minutes. Phone wedged into the seat crevice, camera oriented at the aisle. Her recording had the meal service denial. It had Carol's 2 plastic cups. It had Renee Okafor's intervention. and it had Brianna Wells standing in the aisle of a first-class cabin, saying there was never a shortage with the steadiness of someone who had decided that being right mattered more than being safe. Dana would not post it immediately. She was a journalist, not a content creator. She had standards about verification and context, but she was building a file, and the file was nearly complete, and the only thing she was still waiting for was the thing she was increasingly certain was coming: the rest of the story. Carol recovered. That was the thing about 26 years of practice. You could be caught in a lie in the aisle of your own first-class cabin in front of 7 witnesses and a recording device. And if you had 26 years of practice, you could recover the surface. "I appreciate your input," she said to Brianna. Measured, controlled, returned to professionalism the way some people return to a script. "Please prepare the remaining meal containers for landing protocols. We'll address any discrepancies in the post-flight report." She turned back to Desmond. "Sir, I apologize for any confusion during service today. We'll make sure your experience is noted." Desmond looked at her. "Noted," he said. One word, flat and quiet, but carrying exactly enough to let Carol hear, if she was listening, that being noted was not the same as being resolved. Carol walked back toward the galley. Her heels were silent on the carpet. Her spine was absolutely straight. The back of a person who had decided that control of her posture was the one thing still available to her. Brianna didn't follow immediately. She stood in the aisle for a moment, looking at Desmond. He looked back. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head slightly. "I should have said something earlier. You said it when you were ready." She nodded, once, then turned and followed Carol into the galley. Greg Pullman cleared his throat. It was an interesting sound. The throat clearing of a man who had been sitting 2 feet from an injustice for 4 hours, benefiting from it in the sense that the better service had flowed to him, by default, and who was now having the specific experience of realizing that. He looked at Desmond. "I owe you an apology," Greg said. Desmond waited. "I noticed things earlier. The cup situation. I noticed it and I didn't." Greg stopped. "Started again. I didn't say anything because it wasn't affecting me and I told myself it wasn't my place." He looked at his hands. "That's a weak reason." "It's an honest one," Desmond said. "Doesn't make it better." "No," Desmond agreed. "It doesn't." Greg was quiet for a moment. "I've been in business for 30 years. Built things. Employed people. Told myself I treated people fairly." He paused. "I'm reconsidering some things." Desmond nodded. He did not say good or about time or anything that would perform a moral judgment, because Greg Pullman having a genuine reckoning was more valuable than Greg Pullman being scolded by someone with more righteousness than he had. That was another thing his father had taught him. You want to change the room, you have to leave people enough dignity to walk through the door. Renee Okafor had turned back to her book, or appeared to. She added one line to her notes application. Then she looked out the window. The eastern seaboard was becoming visible. The landscape had changed from the flat geometry of the middle of the country to the denser, greener, more irregular terrain of the northeast. They were maybe 90 minutes out. Dana Reeves finally typed the line she'd been withholding for 30 minutes. It was the headline. She didn't post it yet. She just typed it and sat with it. Let it exist on the screen. In journalism, you learned to write the headline early because the headline told you whether you actually had a story. Whether what you were witnessing was an event or a pattern. Whether you were writing about one bad employee on one bad morning, or something that went deeper and wider than any individual. She had written the headline. She had a story. What happened in the galley after Brianna followed Carol in was not something any of the first-class passengers could hear. The galley curtain muffled it to a level of low urgency, the specific audio texture of a tense conversation being conducted under deliberate noise control. What Desmond could hear, faintly, was the internal phone being picked up again. That was at 11:07 a.m. He noted the time. 11 minutes later, at 11:18 a.m., Captain Roy Dalton appeared from the cockpit. He was a man in his early 50s with the particular bearing of career aviators, upright, deliberate, taking up exactly the amount of space he was entitled to, and no more. His uniform was immaculate. He moved through the first-class cabin the way experienced captains moved through problems, with visible confidence that was not quite managing to fully conceal visible concern. He stopped at the galley first. There was a brief conversation, Carol's voice, then the captain's, low, directional. Then he walked forward, stopped in the aisle beside seat 1A, looked at Desmond with the expression of a man trying to assess a situation he'd been given incomplete information about. Sir. Professional. Neutral. I understand there have been some service concerns on this flight. I'd like to hear your perspective. Desmond looked up from the laptop. He had decided, when the captain appeared, how this was going to go. Not with anger. Not with the inventory of grievance that would have been entirely justified. Because the captain showing up in the cabin meant Carol had made a call. And the call had almost certainly included the kinds of language that activated aviation security protocols rather than customer service protocols. So Desmond was going to be very clear and very specific and very calm. The service concerns, he said, are documented. I've been noting them since boarding. He turned the laptop to face the captain. Not the whole document, just the top section. Times, observations, specific language. The kind of record that looked like what it was, a professional assessment, not a passenger complaint. The captain looked at the screen. His expression changed slightly. Not a lot. Just enough. I see. I'd also like to note, Desmond said, that I believe a report was made to this cockpit at roughly 10:58 a.m. characterizing my behavior as a safety concern. I'd like to know what specifically was reported. A pause. The captain looked at the screen again, then at Desmond, then at the document. What is your name, sir? Desmond Holt. The captain's eyes moved to something in his own memory, something that was almost connecting. Not quite yet. And your purpose for traveling today, Mr. Holt? Business assessment. What industry? Desmond looked at him steadily. Aviation. Another pause. Longer this time. Dr. Okafor had not moved. Greg Pullman had not moved. Dana Reeves's phone was still in the seat crevice. The captain looked at the document on the laptop screen. At the timestamps. At the clean, specific language of someone who had been documenting rather than reacting, taking notes rather than escalating, building a record rather than making a scene. Mr. Holt. The captain's voice had changed, very slightly, like someone who had walked into a room and was re-evaluating the geometry. I'd like to discuss this further when we land. I'd like that too, Desmond said. The captain nodded. Once, then walked back toward the cockpit. He did not stop at the galley on the way. That was also a data point. At 11:34 a.m., Brianna came out of the galley alone. She walked to 1A, stood beside the seat. She was holding her personal phone, screen facing out. I need to show you something, she said. Desmond looked at the screen. 7-8 photographs. A document in Carol's handwriting, scanned and stored in the shared crew tablet. He read the first 2 pages slowly. The service calibration language, the profile management section, the strategies for managing complaint escalations without creating upward mobile records. He read it the way he read acquisition documents, with the specific attention of someone looking not just at what was there, but at what it implied about everything that wasn't written down. He looked up. How long has this been on the shared tablet? I don't know when she added it, but it was there when I started 2 years ago. I've opened the file. I just never scrolled past the first section. You opened it today. I needed to look at something else and I opened the wrong folder. And then I kept reading. She paused. I photographed it. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing, Desmond said. He was quiet for a moment, reading the last page again. The log, the flight numbers, the codes, PRM1. He had a reasonable inference about what that stood for. He looked at Brianna. She was 27 years old and she was shaking slightly. Not visibly, not in the way most people would notice, but the way people shook when adrenaline had been running for a while. And the decision was already made and the body was catching up to what the mind had committed to. You should keep those photos, he said. Don't delete them. Don't send them anywhere yet. Keep them on your personal device. Okay, you did the right thing, she nodded. Then she said, I should have done it earlier. Maybe, Desmond said. But you did it now, at the moment when it would have been easiest not to. She looked at him for a moment, walked back toward the galley. Desmond looked at the 2 plastic cups still sitting on his tray table. Then he picked up his phone and started a new email. It was addressed to 2 people, the General Counsel of Meridian Aviation Group and the HR Director of Apex Airlines, whose contact information he had memorized before boarding, because he memorized the contact information of relevant personnel at every company he assessed. Standard practice. He wrote 4 sentences. He described what had occurred. He attached nothing. There was nothing to attach yet. The photographs were on Brianna's phone. Dana's recording was on Dana's phone. His own documentation was in the assessment file on his laptop. He pressed send. Then he looked out the window. New York was still invisible from this altitude, but the sky was changing, thickening. Slightly with the particular haze that gathered over the eastern seaboard. When you got close enough to see, it wasn't one city but a continuous fabric of cities running up the coast, stitched together by highways and rail lines, and the invisible infrastructure of 10 million daily decisions. He was going to land in that city in approximately 74 minutes. And between now and then, there was one more thing that needed to happen. He felt it. The atmospheric pressure of the situation. The same feeling he'd had in part 1, that sense of a sequence not yet complete. Carol was in the galley. She had been in the galley for 26 minutes, and the internal phone had been picked up twice. Desmond waited. Greg Pullman was looking at him. Not the covert observational glance of someone trying not to be noticed watching. Just looking. The direct gaze of a man sitting with something uncomfortable. "The call you made earlier," Greg said. "The one about legal teams and acquisition documents." Desmond looked at him. "You're not just in the aviation business," Greg said. It was not quite a question. Desmond said nothing. Greg nodded slowly. The way people nodded when they were recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the last 5 hours. "I've been in real estate 30 years, Greg said. "I know what an acquisition call sounds like." He paused. "I also know what it looks like when someone with actual power decides not to use it immediately." He looked at the plastic cups on the tray table. Then back at Desmond. "You're waiting for something." "I'm watching," Desmond said. "There's a difference." Greg was quiet. "What are you watching for?" he said finally. Desmond looked at the galley curtain, then at the window, then at the assessment document on his laptop screen. 17 lines of documentation representing 5 hours and 43 minutes of deliberate invisibility. "I'm watching to see what the system does," Desmond said, "when it thinks nobody important is looking." Greg sat with that a long time. Then he said, "And if someone important is looking?" Desmond turned back to the window. Outside, the altitude was reading lower. The ground was becoming specific. Not the abstracted geometry of the Midwest, but actual landscape, actual trees, actual roads. Close enough now to see that it was real. Then Desmond said, "The system finds out." The descent announcement came 50 minutes out from JFK. Captain Dalton's voice over the intercom, measured, professional. The standard language about altitude and local time and weather in New York. 63 degrees, partly cloudy. Expected arrival at gate B17 in approximately 50 minutes. 50 minutes. Desmond looked at the 2 plastic cups on his tray table. He had left them there the entire flight, not out of spite, not as performance. Objects told stories that words could rewrite. The cups were evidence of something specific and visible, and they were going to stay visible until he decided it was time to have the conversation that made them irrelevant. That time was almost here. He could feel the geometry of the situation shifting. The way a room shifted when someone finally said the thing that had been unsaid for too long. The pressure changed. The air itself seemed to recognize that something was about to be different from how it had been. Carol had not come out of the galley in 31 minutes. Brianna had come out twice. Once to collect tray tables in rows 3 through 5. Once to distribute landing cards, moving quickly and efficiently, with the practiced brevity of someone carrying something heavy inside while also doing a job. She did not look toward the galley curtain. She did not look toward 1A. She looked at the task directly in front of her and completed it. Desmond respected that. Greg Pullman across the aisle was not on his phone, had not been on his phone for the past 40 minutes. He was sitting with his hands folded on the tray table, and the expression of a man running a calculation that kept producing the same uncomfortable answer, no matter how many times he ran it. Dr. Okafor had closed her file folder. She was looking out the window. Dana Reeves had not typed anything in 20 minutes. She was still. The stillness of someone who had the file assembled and was waiting for the moment to open it. The cabin was doing what cabins did on descent. Tray tables folding, seats moving upright. The physical choreography of ending a flight. Normalcy reasserting itself over whatever had happened at altitude, except the normalcy was thinner than usual, like the surface of water when something large was moving underneath it. 30 minutes before landing, Desmond opened the black folder. He had carried it in the canvas bag since boarding in Los Angeles. Leather, not expensive, functional, dark, with a clasp that opened quietly. Inside, a letter of authorization on Meridian Aviation Group letterhead, signed and dated 3 days ago. An acquisition summary, 2 pages, with the Apex Airlines board seal in the upper right corner. His corporate identification. The documents that told the story he had not told yet. He set the folder on the tray table beside the 2 plastic cups. Looked at the combination for a moment. A plastic cup that had cost the airline 4 cents. A document representing $8 billion. Both real, both his, both part of the same morning. He closed the folder. Greg Pullman was watching, eyes moving from the folder to Desmond's face and then away, with the careful discretion of a man who had decided to observe rather than intrude, which was, Desmond thought, a more useful version of Greg than the one who had spent the first 4 hours not noticing anything. 20 minutes later, the galley curtain moved. Carol came out. Whatever she had done with those 49 minutes inside the galley, whatever story she had assembled about what was happening and how it was going to resolve it, had not fully rebuilt the composure she'd carried for the first 3 hours of the flight. She was still professional. She would probably be professional until the moment she stopped being employed. 26 years was a long time to construct an exterior, but the exterior was working harder now. She moved through the cabin collecting final items. A glass here, a blanket there, a brief word with the retired couple in row 4, forward through the rows, Greg Pullman's crystal glass, row 1. She looked at the tray table, 2 plastic cups, and a black leather folder with a clasp, sitting exactly where a meal tray would have been if that passenger had received the meal he was supposed to receive. Carol looked at the folder, then at Desmond. "Can I take those for you?" She meant the cups. Her voice was entirely even. "Entirely professional in a minute," Desmond said. He waited until Carol had finished the cabin collection, until she had turned back toward row 1 with nowhere left to go, until Brianna had emerged from the galley and was standing in the aisle with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for this moment and was now in it. Then Desmond stood up, and that was when everything changed. Standing in a first-class cabin 40 minutes before landing was not something passengers did. It broke the ambient quiet of the descent routine. Heads turned, not dramatically, the small, automatic reorientation of people who noticed a shift in their environment. Dr. Okafor turned, Greg Pullman turned, Dana Reeves looked up. Desmond picked up the black folder, opened it, held the acquisition summary so the Apex Airlines board seal in the upper right corner was visible, not raised like a courtroom exhibit, just held, present. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "My name is Desmond Holt," he said, calm, specific, the voice of someone accustomed to rooms going quiet when he spoke. "I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Aviation Group. As of 72 hours ago, I am the owner of Apex Airlines." 5 seconds of silence. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a sentence to finish. The actual silence of a room reorganizing itself around information that changed everything that had come before it. Greg Pullman made a sound that was not a word. Dr. Okafor sat very still. Dana Reeves's hand moved to her phone. And Carol Marsh stood 3 feet from the galley entrance, with 26 years of professional identity, and the specific expression of a person who had been building a case against herself all morning without knowing it. Desmond looked at her directly. "Ms. Marsh," he said, "I'd like you to stay for this conversation." Carol did not move, which was answer enough. "I need to ask you something," Desmond said. Not a threat, not an accusation. The tone of someone genuinely wanting to understand the shape of something. "And I'm asking you in front of these passengers because they were here this morning. They witnessed what happened. They deserve to hear the question too." The cabin was very quiet. "How long have you been doing this work?" Carol looked at him. Her composure was still intact, just barely, just technically. 26 years. "And in 26 years you've been genuinely good at it." He meant it. He was not performing generosity. "I watched you this morning. The service sequencing, the way you moved through the cabin, the operational knowledge, the memory for passenger names and preferences. You're skilled." Carol said nothing. "That's what makes this harder," Desmond said, "because skill doesn't cancel what you chose to do with it." He let that sit for a moment. Outside, the ground was coming up, the geography of the Northeast visible now through the windows, dense, green, specific, no longer the abstracted landscape of altitude. "My question isn't about what you did to me," Desmond said. "I'm going to be fine. I've been fine since before this flight, and I'll be fine long after it lands." His voice was even, not angry, not performative, just factual. "My question is about the people who sat in this seat before I did." Carol's jaw moved slightly. The ones who received a plastic cup and a chicken entree and a very professional explanation, Desmond continued. The ones who left this aircraft not knowing that the inventory shortage was a procedure you had designed specifically to be unverifiable, not knowing that there was a document on the shared crew tablet with a code for their seat number entered before service even started. He paused. How many of them were there, Miss Marsh? Carol did not answer. The log goes back 4 years, Desmond said. I've seen it. Brianna showed it to me. 4 years of notations and seat numbers. 4 years of passengers who took what they were given and went home. Carol's voice, when it came, was controlled, still professional, but thin in a way that it had not been at 6:30 in the morning. I was managing service standards, she said. I've spent 26 years maintaining the quality of this cabin. That requires judgment calls that. That's what you called it, Desmond said. Yes, some passengers required different, Miss Marsh. He said it quietly, not cutting her off, just stopping the sentence before it finished itself into something she couldn't take back. I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm asking you to understand what I'm actually telling you. She looked at him. The passengers I'm asking about, Desmond said. They weren't people who could do what I'm doing right now. They didn't have a folder. They didn't have a board seal. They just had a first-class ticket and an expectation of decent treatment. He looked at the folder in his hand, then back at her. And they left this aircraft having learned one more time that the expectation wasn't theirs to have. The silence that followed had weight. Carol's composure was still present, but it had become the composure of a structure after the interior had been removed, still standing, visibly hollow. I believe, she said finally, her voice barely above professional volume, that I was doing what was best for the cabin experience. Desmond nodded slowly. I know you believe that, he said. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. About people who build these systems. He glanced at the galley curtain. They don't build them in malice, usually. They build them in conviction. The conviction that they know who belongs somewhere and who doesn't. And they're so certain about it that they never stop to ask who gave them that authority. Carol looked away. Toward the window. Toward the ground coming up. Toward something that was not Desmond's face or the folder or the 2 plastic cups still sitting on the tray table. Nobody gave it to me, she said quietly, and for the first time in the entire flight, her voice carried something that was not professional calibration. Something thinner, something that sounded faintly like the edge of understanding arriving later than it should have. No, Desmond agreed, nobody did. Brianna was standing in the aisle still throughout this entire exchange. She had not moved. Had not looked at Carol, and had not looked away from Carol. She was holding the trash bag she'd been carrying when she emerged from the galley, because she had never thought to put it down, and there was something about that detail, the ordinary artifact of the ordinary job, held through an extraordinary moment that made the whole thing more real than it would have been otherwise. Desmond looked at her. Ms. Wells. Brianna looked at him. You found documentation this morning, he said. You photographed it. You came out of the galley and said what you saw in front of your supervisor, knowing the professional risk. Yes. Walk me through the decision, he said. Not what you found, the decision itself. Brianna was quiet for a moment. I stood in the galley for a long time, she said. I kept running the numbers. My mom's medical bills, my performance review. The fact that Carol has 26 years and I have 2. She paused, and then I stopped running the numbers. Why? Because the numbers weren't the point. She looked at Desmond steadily. You were sitting up here with 2 plastic cups on your tray table, and nobody was saying anything. And I knew why nobody was saying anything, because it cost something to say it. She paused again, but it also cost something not to. Desmond nodded once. That's the one, he said. She looked at him. That moment, he said, where the cost of silence starts to feel heavier than the cost of speaking. That's the moment that matters. That's the moment that changes things. He held her gaze. You keep your job. More than that. But we'll talk about the rest on the ground. Brianna exhaled, not dramatically, just breath releasing from somewhere it had been held too long. Carol was still standing in the aisle. She had heard all of it. She looked at Brianna, and the expression on her face was something Desmond had not expected and had no prepared response for. Not anger, not betrayal. Something closer to the expression of a person looking at a version of themselves from a long time ago. Before 26 years of certainty had settled into architecture. Brianna, Carol said. Brianna looked at her. I thought I was teaching you how to do this job well. You were, Brianna said. Some of it. Carol held that. "I'm sorry," she said, not to Desmond, to Brianna, which was not what anyone in the cabin had expected and which landed differently because of that. "I'm sorry for what I taught you to overlook." The apology did not erase anything. It was not designed to. It was just a woman at the end of something, saying the true thing for once, in the only direction that made sense to say it. Brianna nodded, once, small. Then she looked at the trash bag in her hands, and walked to Desmond's tray table, and picked up both plastic cups, dropped them in the bag. The small, clean sound of 4-cent cups hitting the bottom of a trash bag, which was somehow the most final sound in the entire flight. Desmond looked at the empty tray table, then at Carol. "You'll be met by HR and legal when we land," he said. "There will be a complete investigation. The document, the log, the complaint history, the supervisor chain that received reports and closed them without action. All of it." He paused. "You'll have the opportunity to participate in that process." Carol straightened slightly, 26 years of professional spine holding one last time. "I understand," she said. She turned, walked back toward the galley, her heels silent on the carpet, her back absolutely straight. The posture of a person for whom composure had become so habitual that it continued even when everything it was protecting had already gone. The galley curtain closed behind her, and the first-class cabin of Apex Flight 2209 sat in a silence that was different from all the other silences of the morning. Not the silence of a room waiting for something to happen. The silence of a room where something had finished happening, and the people in it were sitting with what it had cost. Dr. Renee Okafor spoke first. "Well," she said, one word, dry and precise and carrying 41 years of watching rooms sort themselves out. She looked at Desmond with the expression of a person making a final professional assessment. "For the record, I've been on a great many flights. I've never seen anyone sit in that kind of situation for 5 hours and not once raise their voice. My father raised me to understand the difference between reacting and responding," Desmond said. "Smart man. The smartest person I ever knew," Desmond said. "He just worked in a place where nobody asked his opinion about it." Renee looked at him for a moment. "Your father taught you something good," she said. "Simple, specific. Not the performed warmth of someone trying to say the right thing. Just the true observation of a person who had spent 61 years developing precision about what was worth saying." Desmond looked at her. "He did," he said. She turned back to the window. Greg Pullman cleared his throat. The sound of a man who had something to say and was deciding how to say it without making it about himself, which was harder than it looked. "I've been sitting here doing an inventory," Greg said, "of the last 5 hours. He looked at his hands. "I noticed the cups. The first one, the plastic one, I looked at it, set my own glass down, and then I picked it back up and went back to my phone call." He stopped. "That's the part I keep coming back to. Not that I didn't notice, that I noticed, and then I decided it wasn't my business." "It's a common decision," Desmond said. "It's a convenient one," Greg said. "Which isn't the same thing." He looked at Desmond directly, not with the performance of a man demonstrating his own moral growth, with the flat directness of a person making an accounting. "I've been in business 30 years, Greg said. "Built things, employed people, told myself I was fair." He paused. "I'm revising that assessment." "What will you do with the revision?" Desmond asked. Greg was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm not going to not know what I know now. That's something." Desmond nodded. It was. Dana Reeves stopped at 1A on her way to the door. She had her bag over her shoulder, and her phone in her hand, and the composed efficiency of a journalist who had what she needed, and was now in the phase that required patience rather than urgency. "I have a recording," she said, "from roughly 10:30 onward, and observation notes from boarding, I know," Desmond said. "I'm going to report this story. I want you to have that clearly. I'd expect you to. It won't be a story about a billionaire who got bad service," she said carefully. "It's going to be about the system. What happened on this flight, and what it reveals about how these structures operate and sustain themselves." "That's the right story," he said. She held out a card, the physical kind. He took it. "I'll comment for publication," he said. "Not today. When the internal process is complete and the accountability is already real. So the story isn't what forces the change, it's what documents that the change happened." Dana considered that. "That's a fair ask," she said. "I'll hold until you're ready." She walked toward the front of the cabin. Desmond looked at the empty tray table, the acquisition folder still sitting there, the Apex Airlines board seal catching the cabin light. He thought about what Brianna had said. about the cost of silence feeling heavier than the cost of speaking, about the moment where the numbers stopped being the point. He had built 4 companies from the understanding that systems were not neutral, that every process, every protocol, every unwritten rule about who got what kind of service in what kind of space, all of it was designed, whether anyone admitted to designing it or not. And what was designed could be redesigned. What was built could be rebuilt. What had been allowed to continue for 4 years or 26 years could be stopped. Not perfectly, not completely, not without the work of 1,000 decisions made by 1,000 people in 1,000 moments where the cost of speaking and the cost of silence sat on opposite sides of a scale. But stopped. The aircraft turned off the active runway, taxied toward gate B-17, the terminal becoming visible through the windows. The flat, functional light of JFK in the afternoon, which had always seemed to Desmond like the most honest light of any airport he'd ever passed through. No pretensions. Just the business of moving people from one place to another. Captain Dalton appeared from the cockpit. He walked through the first-class cabin with the measured stride of a man who had received information in the last 30 minutes that had substantially reorganized his understanding of his morning. He stopped at 1A. Looked at the folder on the tray table. Mr. Holt. His voice was careful. I received communication from your legal team. I know. Dalton looked at him with the directness of someone who had decided that the only way through this was straight. I owe you an apology. For the call I took from the cabin this morning. For the action I was prepared to take without verifying what I'd been told. I accept the apology, Desmond said, and I need you to sit with a question before we debrief on the ground. Dalton waited. When Carol called you this morning, Desmond said, she described a passenger as potentially dangerous. No specifics, no documented behavior. Just a characterization. He paused. And you were prepared to have law enforcement meet this aircraft based on that characterization alone. So the question is, would you have taken the same action if Carol had called you about a different passenger? A passenger who didn't look like me? Dalton was quiet. A long time. I don't know, he said finally. That's the honest answer. I don't know, and I'm not comfortable with not knowing. That's where the real conversation starts, Desmond said. Not with what you knew you were doing. With what you didn't examine. Dalton nodded. It was the nod of a man who understood that his career was not over, but that something was over. Some version of unexamined certainty that had been operational for a long time and had just cost him considerably. I'll be in the debrief, Dalton said. I know you will, Desmond said. The captain returned to the cockpit. The jetway connected with the soft mechanical thud of arrival. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the first-class cabin of Apex Flight 2209 began the ordinary business of ending. Bags from overhead compartments, coats collected, the departure choreography that happened the same way on every flight everywhere, regardless of what had occurred during it. Greg Pullman stood, got his briefcase, paused in the aisle. One more thing, he said to Desmond. The next time I'm sitting 2 feet from something I should call out. He stopped, started again. I'm going to call it out. Good, Desmond said. Not warmly, not harshly, just directly. The response that took the statement seriously instead of performing gratitude for it. Greg nodded. Walked off the aircraft. Passengers filed out. Dr. Okafor with her file folder and her quiet, total awareness of the room. Dana Reeves with the focused composure of someone already organizing the story in her mind. The retired couple from row 4, who had watched the entire morning with the patient attention of people who had lived long enough to recognize when they were witnessing something they would remember. Then the first-class cabin was empty, except for Desmond and Brianna, who came out of the galley one more time. No trash bag now, just her, standing in the aisle. She's gone, Brianna said, meaning Carol, who had left with the first wave. Through the forward door without looking back, carrying 26 years of professional identity into whatever came next. I know, Desmond said. Brianna looked at the empty cabin, at the seats that had held 12 people through a 5-hour and 43-minute flight, that none of them had expected to become what it became. What actually happens now, she asked, to the document, to the log, to the people who received reports about it and filed them away? Complete investigation, Desmond said. The document, the log, every complaint that was reported and closed without action. Every name in the supervisor chain. It goes as deep as it goes. That could go pretty deep. Yes, he said. It could. She looked at him. Is that what you came for? She asked. When you booked this flight, did you expect to find this? Desmond thought about the answer. I expected to find problems, he said. Operational inefficiencies, training gaps, technology that needed updating. That's always what I find when I do this. He paused. I didn't expect to become the evidence. Brianna was quiet. Does that happen often? She said. More often than the reports suggest, Desmond said. Because the reports are written by the same systems that have the problem. She let that settle. What do you need from me? She said. For the investigation. The photographs on your phone. A formal statement. And something else. He looked at her. I want you involved in building the replacement training program. Not as a witness, as a designer. Brianna stared at him. I'm 27, she said. I've been doing this job for 2 years. You know where the document was hidden, he said. You know what it said. You know why you didn't look past the first page for 2 years. And you know the exact moment you decided you had to. That's more useful to a training program than someone who never faced the choice. She was quiet for a long time. Okay, she said, just that. One word. The word of someone who had used up the dramatic vocabulary of the morning and had arrived at something simpler on the other side. Desmond picked up his canvas bag, picked up the folder, stood up from seat 1A for the last time. He walked to the galley entrance, stopped, looked in, 4 filet mignon containers, still in the warming compartment, labeled, sealed, untouched since before the meal service began this morning. He looked at them for a moment, then walked off the aircraft, the jetway, the terminal, the flat afternoon light of JFK doing exactly what it always did. 3 people were waiting at the gate. Patricia O.C., his general counsel, 11 years, holding a legal pad with the focused readiness of someone who had received his email and had been preparing ever since. Next to her, Robert Finch, Apex Airlines HR director, who had the look of a man who had spent the morning discovering exactly how many things he should have known and didn't. And next to him, a woman in her 60s, gray-haired, with the Apex Airlines executive pin on her blazer, the board chair, who had decided that this required her physical presence, which told Desmond something useful about her. Patricia, he said. Ready, she said. He looked at Finch. I need the complete complaint history for Carol Marsh. 4 years. Every report, every disposition, every name in the chain that received it and decided what to do with it. Finch nodded. I started pulling it when your email came in. You're going to want to see it, which meant it was worse than a single employee problem, which was what Desmond had suspected since he saw the log. The crew tablet from this flight, Desmond said. Preserved, Finch said. Flagged before the turnover crew touched it. Desmond looked at the board chair. She met his eyes with the directness of someone who had not gotten to her position by looking away from difficult things. Mr. Holt, she said, the board is prepared to move on whatever you determine is necessary, without conditions. What I determine is necessary, Desmond said, will require more structural change than a termination and a press statement. I understand that. The complaint history will show that this was reported and suppressed. That means we're investigating a system, not a person. I understand that too, she said. That's why I'm here in person instead of on a conference call. Desmond looked at her for a moment. Good, he said. They moved through the terminal, the ordinary movement of people with work to do, in an airport doing what airports always did, the human project of arriving somewhere, continuing. Desmond walked with them, and he thought, not about Carol, not about the investigation that was starting, not about the press coverage that Dana Reeves's story would generate, or the board meetings, or the policy overhauls, or the 100 structural decisions that were now on his calendar. He thought about a Tuesday evening in Detroit, a kitchen table, math homework spread across it, his father listening to him, describe something that had happened at school, a teacher who couldn't reconcile his grade with her expectation of him, with the patient attention of a man who had been hearing versions of this story for 31 years and had decided, somewhere along the way, that the only answer to it was to build something that outlasted it. James Holt had never told him to go build something so big that they couldn't ignore it. He hadn't needed to say it, he demonstrated it every day. In 31 years of showing up, of doing the work in front of him, of refusing to let what people assumed about him determine what he actually was. Desmond had learned to do it in different rooms, but the principle was the same. You showed up, you did the work. You made it so that the next person who came along found a different room than the one you walked into. He pulled out his phone, opened the photograph of his father, looked at it. James Holt in front of the steel plant gate, hands in his coat pockets, looking directly at the camera. Unimpressed, steady. Like a man who knew exactly what the day required of him and had already decided, before the photograph was taken and before anyone asked to give it. Desmond put the phone in his pocket. The work was just starting.